Dzień dobry. Hi everyone. Pan Tadeusz by Adam Mickiewicz was written in Polish language and is now the national poem of Poland, and perhaps the most well-known, well-read book in the country, and also the most important, maybe after the Bible. It's a compulsory reading in all Polish schools, so in theory every Pole has read bits of it at some point so they can recite passages from it. Next time you meet your Pole friend, ask them. Pan Tadeusz is considered the last epic of European literature written in 1830s because novel writing took over as a literary form in the middle of 19th century. The book has inspired both Poland's and Lithuania's national anthems. That's the kind of epic we're talking about. In 2018, both countries celebrated their centenary of their independence by an exhibition of Pan Tadeusz. In 2014, UNESCO recognized Pan Tadeusz as a treasured relic of memory of the world. Pan in Polish means sir, so here Pan Tadeusz simply means Sir or Master Tadeusz, referring to the protagonists of the poem. First, let me tell you a little about the author. Adam Mickiewicz was born in 1798 in a small village in the Russian portion of occupied Poland-Lithuania Commonwealth. Due to his political activities, he was exiled into Russia in 1824. After 5 years in the cold of Russia, he was allowed to leave, so he headed to Germany and met with Goethe and Hegel. Germany was also cold, so he headed to Italy. But his itchy feet meant he couldn't settle anywhere like a dislodged dandelion seed. During this time, he traveled to many countries and cities. In France, he wrote Pan Tadeusz between 1832 and 1834 in 14 months. In his personal life, his wife suffered from attacks of insanity, which must have made his writing life more difficult. If Goethe or Hegel couldn't, the famous Polish composer Frédéric Chopin met to console him. In 1855, he went to Constantinople, or modern-day Istanbul, on a military mission trying to mobilize Poles and Turks against the Russians. Sadly, he died without being able to see Poland as an independent country. Adam Mickiewicz was driven by an intense feeling for his birthplace and his desire to return, and also the guilt of abandoning it. This guilt shows up in the poem in the shape of a priest who murders a fellow Pole and later tries to mend his mistake by mobilizing people against the Muscovites or the occupying Russians. As much as it's a national epic, it was Adam Mickiewicz's own personal debt to his country. Now he's the national poet of Poland in the same way Shakespeare is in Britain and Pushkin is in Russia. Let me give you a little historical context to help understand the story. Started in 1569, Poland and Lithuania united to create the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which existed for almost 230 years. But by 1795 it had been completely erased from the map of Europe, divided between Russia in the east and Prussia and Austria in the west. Poland and Lithuania were not re-established as independent countries until 1918 after the Bolshevik Revolution. Putin heavily criticized Lenin for allowing countries like Poland and Finland and other Baltic nations to claim independence from Russia. There's a common stereotype that Poles don't like foreigners. Well, foreigners have been invading Poland a lot, so it's hard to trust them. The name Poland means the plains or open fields, so the landscape has been quite inviting to the Russians from the east and the Germans from the west to play war. Today, Poles are said to be a bit grumpy and tend to complain a lot and not smile much. I blame the Russians and Germans for that. 3 cool things that Poles have invented or discovered are condoms by Julius Rome in 1912, rhodium and polonium used in radiation by Marie Curie in 1911, and the discovery of Earth's revolution around the sun by Nicolaus Copernicus in 1543. My favorite Poles are Frédéric Chopin, Joseph Conrad, and Robert Lewandowski. Now let me summarize the story. The story takes place in a small village in Poland in 5 days in 1811 and then in 1812, when the country was divided between Russia to the east and Prussia and Austria to the west. The story is somewhat similar to Shakespeare's tale of Romeo and Juliet. It starts off as a conflict between 2 families in a village over the ownership of a castle. But as the story progresses, the conflict shifts from 2 families to a local people against the Russian invaders. The protagonist of the story is Tadeusz Soplica, a 19-year-old nobleman orphaned as a child but brought up by his uncle, Judge Soplica, who is in dispute over the ownership of a castle with Count Horeshko. On the other hand, we have Zosia Horeshko, the main love interest from a rival powerful family in the village. Tadeusz's own father, in fact, murdered Zosia's grandfather, Pantelar Horeshko. As the story unfolds, these family disputes take a more nationalistic tone against the Russian occupying force. So the small family dispute by the end turns into a rebellion against the Russians. On his return from Vilnius to his village in Lithuania, Tadeusz hears about the dispute between the two families. He also meets Zosia, a 13-year-old girl from the opposing family now living in his uncle's household as a gesture of peace between the two families. But the conflict escalates when Count Horeshko finds out Tadeusz's father, Jacek Soplitsa, killed the owner of the castle, who was a Horeshko family member. Meanwhile, during a bear hunt, Tadeusz and Count Horeshko are both rescued from a bear attack by a mysterious priest, Father Robak. Later we learn that he is Tadeusz's father, who murdered Pantelar Horeshko, the owner of the castle. The judge prepares a feast at the castle to celebrate the bear hunt, but he is confronted by a servant of the rival family accusing him of trespassing. A fight breaks out among the two families. Tadeusz challenges the count to a duel. The mysterious Father Robak appears again to admonish the judge and tells him to make peace between the two families, as there are bigger threats out there. Napoleon is on his way to take Poland from Russians, so Poles should unite to fight the Russians instead of killing one another. Soon the news spreads and some nobles gathered to start an uprising against the Russian rulers. Count Horeshko, however, ignores this and takes the Soplitsas hostage, but the Russian soldiers intervene and arrest him and other rebels. The mysterious Father Robak, who by now you might have guessed it, is on a nationalistic mission, but also trying to make amends for his past crime, gets the Russian drunk and releases the Poles. But he is on the verge of death himself. He reveals his true identity as Jacek Soplitsa, Tadeusz's father, who was in love with Pantelar Horeshko's daughter, therefore killed him when he was refused to marry her. He is the only one with a clear vision to fight against the Russians. Soon all the figures in the story are deemed danger to the Russian authority, therefore exiled from Lithuania. A year later, they return to Poland with Napoleon army, and Tadeusz marries Zosia at the end. So unlike the Shakespearean tragedy, this has somewhat happy ending for the couple, but not for the father or the Polish people or the author, who died in exile in Turkey without being able to see Poland as a free country. Now let me discuss some of the themes of Pan Tadeusz. Country versus country. Lithuania is a major character in the book. Every section begins with a beautiful rendering of the landscape itself. The first quirk of this book is that it's the national poem of Poland, yet it's entirely set in Lithuania. It is one of those odd moments in literature that kind of questions how bizarre is the notion of nation in nationalism. Now we think country is set in stone, but if we go back 2 centuries, countries as we know them didn't exist. Also, if you fly above Earth, we don't see countries, only cities, mountains, rivers, lakes, and oceans. It's a poem of an era. If you grew up in a country and later in life that country didn't exist, no matter what, you feel nostalgic of that entity. So I think Pan Tadeusz is like a love letter to a place Adam Mickiewicz grew up. Now here's something to chew on. Adam Mickiewicz was Polish-born in Lithuania, that was part of Tsarist Russia at the time, that is modern-day Belarus. He lived in Russia, France, and died in Turkey, and wrote the national poem of Poland. At the heart of the story is the country or the village of Soplitsovo, where the story takes place. It shows a deep love of the rural life, the Polish countryside, and the idyllic landscape that now ruled by foreign forces. Here's how the poem begins. Lithuania, my homeland, you are health alone. Your worth can only ever be known by one who has lost you. Today I see and tell anew your lovely beauty as I long for you. Religion and politics. Father Robak is an important figure in the story, as he has one goal in mind: to free his country from the Russians. This plays out again in Poland in the 20th century, when the Catholic Church played a major role in the fight against the socialist regime and the spell of USSR over Poland. Perhaps they took inspiration from Father Robak, who under the guise of religion was the main political hero whose vision to liberate Poland is the main driving force. The romantic quest between Tadeusz and Zosia seems secondary. The hope of liberation in the hand of Napoleon, who was admired, didn't pan out as expected. Adam Mickiewicz even went to Rome to get the Pope to support the liberation of Poland, and later went to Turkey to fight the Russians. So Catholicism plays a major role in the politics of the country even to this day. Satire. For some reason, reading Tadeusz at the time felt like reading Dostoevsky. There are so many voices and plenty of dialogue, each distinct and credible. Each character has a very distinct voice, as though it was written by several people. Despite being a very serious epic, it has plenty of bizarre moments, like a group of mushroom pickers appear like a throng of dancers to one of the main characters, Count Horeshko. This is like Don Quixote, where mills appear like giants from a distance. Perhaps Adam Mickiewicz was visualizing his home country of Lithuania from a long distance in Paris, and everything seemed funnier. Fun fact, mushrooming is still big in Poland. In summer, families head to the forest to find mushrooms, and kids are taught how to distinguish between poisonous and non-poisonous mushrooms. At times you get the feeling that mediocre events are described with an epic language, almost like a comedy or a satire of some kind. There's another funny moment when the two lovers are about to kiss when someone swats a fly that comes between them. It's like you cannot catch a break in this poem. Nothing materializes. Even the Polish liberation is a failure at the end. Then there are moments that are somewhat similar to Shahnameh by Ferdowsi, when the poem reflects on the actions as if someone remembers a past experience with a cooler head and can see what he couldn't see at the heat of the moment. There are many scenes of drinking and drunkenness. Even today, there is one stereotype about the Poles is that they drink too much. In Tadeusz, the frequency with which alcohol leads to violence is incredible. One might also read it as if the author was poking fun at the Polish people for drinking too much, which resulted in their country being divided between foreign forces. You get drunk, you lose things, your key, your phone, and in this case, your country. But by giving prominence to this habit of drinking, or even exaggerating a bit more, the author perhaps was reminiscing the simplicity of country life and also making the Polish people more endearing, as the author says they are not vindictive. In the story too, the feuding families patch things up by the end, despite their bloody past. Having said that, it can get a bit tedious at the beginning of the book. The author appears to be too nostalgic of his own childhood vistas, as he describes a little bit too much. The country seems like a distant place he cannot get to, something he's lost and trying to console himself by reminiscing about childhood or the good old days. I guess one can understand when you're stuck in Paris among the French, who aren't the friendliest of people, you miss your country. Form. It was written in verse, 13 syllables rhyming couplet. One of the main enduring qualities of Tadeusz is its poetic beauty. Yes, of course, it's a national epic of Poland, so nostalgia plays a major role, but without its beautiful language and witticism, it wouldn't have lasted the test of time as it has done. The poem is very vivid in its imagery of the countryside. It's very similar to a romantic poem, with intense feeling and yearning. A sense of hopelessness also permeates in the poem. It appears that form plays an important role in this poem, and tradition and preserving the past. There's a lot of food in the poem. Every person has a title. Every scene is carefully ordered. Compared to other epics, I recently discussed the Finnish epic poem, the Kalevala, which was also written around the same time in 1830s and 40s. But as far as the story, it goes centuries back to a deeper past of the Finnish people. Tadeusz is more similar to a novel than an epic, with its realistic characters. Another epic I discussed was the Book of Dede Korkut, which was also a much older epic written centuries before Tadeusz. The one similarity is the foray or raids that often come after men getting drunk. In the Book of Dede Korkut too, there are many raids and drunkenness. In its politics, it has more similarity with the Persian Book of Kings, Shahnameh by Ferdowsi, as they both lament the past of Iran and Poland respectively. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh is gigantic in its length and breadth of history it encompasses. Tadeusz is much more grounded to reality than any of these other epics due to being very recent. The Kalevala is the product of many singers and poets, though compiled by one man, Elias Long. John wrote. The Book of Dede Korkut was written by an anonymous writer, but the stories had existed in the collective consciousness of the Turkic tribes for centuries, if not millennia. Shahnameh was written by Ferdowsi, but he didn't invent the stories, rather collecting them and turn them into verse. So Pan Tadeusz is more realistic, like a novel of realism with a hint of comedy. Sarmatism. There is also a Sarmatian connection between Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, the Persian Book of Kings, and Pan Tadeusz. Sarmatians were some Western Iranian tribes mentioned in Shahnameh as Sam, which in Persian may refer to a cold, and Sarma, or head, as a Sar, because these people were said to have red head. In Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, Sam was the eldest son of the first Iranian king Jamshid. He was given the kingdom of Anatolia, the Caucasus, which closely borders Eastern Europe. In Pan Tadeusz, Sarmatians were believed to be the ancestors of the Polish people and generally referred to an elite landed gentry class of educated Polish and Lithuanians in 17th and 18th centuries. Sarmatianism was seen as a form of romanticism among the poets and writers in Poland, and that they loved the countryside and the old village scene. This belief was part of a movement in Europe to trace their origin to ancient people. Sarmatians were believed to be different from the Slavs. There's a theory that the Alans, an Iranian people, did invade the Slavic territory some 1500 years ago. Even to this day, Sarmatia is a romantic or poetic name for Poland. There's even a journal called Sarmatian Review dedicated to the Polish studies in the United States. Translation. There has been a few English translations of Pan Tadeusz, both in prose and verse. The latest one by Bill Johnson in 2018, which won him a few prizes for his brilliant translation, is probably the best one out there. It uses modern English while trying to capture the voice of the characters and rhyme scheme and the spirit of the original. There is also a free version of Pan Tadeusz in prose on Gutenberg.org, translated by George Rapal Noyes in 1917. For the poetry, go for Bill Johnson's translation, but if you are here for the story, the prose translation might be easier. It's also worth mentioning that the famous Polish film director Andrzej Wajda made Pan Tadeusz into a movie in 1999, which was one of the most successful movies in Poland, but not outside though. For me, Pan Tadeusz is a time capsule of a time when Europe looked very different. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please help me by sharing this among friends on social media. I'm on a journey to read books and stories from every country on earth. Thank you for watching. Dziękuję.